Okay, so today we're going to take a look at how we find or make predictions from a population. So this has to do with what they call sampling and populations. So let's go ahead and start with some definitions really quick. So a population is the entire group that you want to study or gather information about. An example of this would be every student attending Wilson Middle School. That's the entire population. A sample is a smaller group selected from a population to represent the whole. So if I only wanted to get the 7th grade students from Wilson Middle School, that'd be a small sample population. It wouldn't be everybody, it would just be a small part. Now, the actual sampling, what would we be doing here? That's the actual process of choosing a sample from a population. And that's gonna happen either through polling, voting, interviews. I'm either drawing data or I'm pulling a report somehow, and that's how I'm gathering information instead of speaking to every single individual student. So why do we do this? Well, sometimes it's hard to collect data from an entire population. It'd be really difficult for us to go and speak to every single student. So we use the sampling in order to make predictions. And that's what I'm going to show you guys here today. A prediction about the whole group is what we're trying to do by taking a small amount of the sample. And the way we're going to solve this, the way we're going to make our predictions is through proportions. We're going to set up a proportion based off of the sample that we take, and that's what's going to help us make a prediction. So let's walk this, and we're going to break it down, starting with our first survey. So in here it says a survey of 15 out of the 60 students at Wilson Middle School say they prefer reading over watching TV. So let's take a look at the keywords there. So what two things are we comparing? That's the what of the WGU that we're going to be setting up. The two things that we're talking about are students. We're talking about students at Wilson Middle School, and we're talking about the ones that specifically prefer reading. Okay, so my first W, or my what, the words that we're talking about are, I'm gonna put reading to represent students that enjoy reading, compared to the total number of students there, all the students present in the school. Okay, so what is the given information? What ratio of the sample prefers reading? Now the given information is the 15 out of 60. So 15 out of 60 students prefer reading. Okay, so we have the first two parts. Let's look at our last part. Now we're trying to figure out if there are 300 students, so there's 300 students at Wilson Middle School, we're going to use a proportion to predict how many students might prefer reading. Okay, so we're going to set up our WGU starting with the what. So I'm going to just put down reading to represent that part, and then total number of students. I'm just going to put STU for students. So we were given that 15 out of 60 students prefer reading. So X, how many prefer reading? How many prefer reading out of 300 students? So the 300 connects with the students. Now we're going to cross multiply and divide and figure out how many students there are. So I'm going to cross multiply 60 times X and 15 times 300. So 60 times X is going to be 60X. 15 times 300 is going to be 4,500. Then I divide by 60, like that. So 4,500 divided by 60, what I can do to make this easier, I can cancel out these zeros before I put that into my division. So 450 now divided by 6. This is a lot easier to manage than this. So I know that 6 times 7 will get me close to 45, so I'll put down 42. 5 minus the 2 will give me the 3. 4 minus 0 will give me 0. I'm going to bring down this next 0. 6 times 5 gets me the 30 that I'm looking for. And then I have no remainder, so I'm good to go. 75 students is the answer. So I have 75 students who would prefer reading over watching TV. So we're going to use the exact same steps on some more examples. Got about 3 more to do, because you're going to be presented with different situations. And what we're basically doing is still using proportions to predict outcomes. All right. So in this one scenario, we're going to take a look at what they call a probabilistic outcome. What's the probability if I spin this spinner? It says the spinner is divided into 4 equal sections labeled red, blue, green, and yellow. If you spin the spinner 200 times, predict how many times it will land on red. Okay, so let's take a look at our keywords. So the first keyword that I'm looking at is going to be 4 equal sections. So I got 4 equal sections. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to be looking for is where it says landing on red. So I have sections and I have red. And I'm spinning this thing 200 times. Let's break it down. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my WGU. So what is it that I'm comparing? Well, I'm looking for red, so I need red compared to the number of spins. I'm going to spin this a couple of times. And so the given information isn't implicitly given to you. They're not saying outright, this is what the given information is. You have to determine that by what you know about probability and spinning a spinner. If there are 4 possible outcomes and you're only looking for one, that means that there's a 1 out of 4 chance that you'll get a red. So if there's a 1 out of 4 chance that you'll get a red, theoretically speaking, if you spun it, if you did 200 spins, that's why the 200's on the bottom, how many of those would be red? So this is our proportion. So we're gonna go and cross multiply and divide. So 4 times x, it's gonna be 4x and 200. Then I divide both sides by 4. So 200 divided by 4, that'll give me 50. And just to show you the walkthrough of it, if I had 200 here, 4 times 5 will give me 20. 0 left over, bring down the other 0. 4 times 0 will get me 0, and then I'm done. So I'm looking at an outcome of 50 red spins out of 200. That's a reasonable prediction. Okay, so let's use the same idea here. Try and do this one on your own. I'm going to pause the video. Go ahead and attempt to set up a WGU just like this and solve for what your answer is going to be. Okay, hopefully that was a good enough pause and you got your answer. I'm going to work through it kind of quickly. It says a 6-sided die is used to play a game. If you roll the die 120 times, so I'm going to roll this. That's the action I'm taking 120 times. Predict how many times you would expect it for it to land on 3. So I'm trying to get it to land on 3, okay? And I have a 6-sided die, okay? This is all important key information. So a 6-sided die is gonna be rolled. So I'm looking at 2 things. I'm looking at if it lands on the number 3, and I am rolling it out of my total rolls, okay? So if I'm looking at a 6-sided dice, I know that there is a 1 out of 6 chance that it will land on 3, okay? Therefore, how many times will it land on 3 if I roll it 120 times? If I do 120 rolls, how many of those will land on 3? Now that I got my proportion set up, cross multiply, so 6 times x is 6x. 1 times 120 is gonna be 120. Dividing those both by 6. 120 divided by 6, that's gonna give me 20. So I'm going to expect to see it land on the number 3 20 times. Okay, so this last one is going to take into account this table here. Now this is a very common STAR test-like question. So I'm gonna walk through this a little bit slower, and we've broken it up into 2 types of questions that you're gonna see about a graph. So it says, Kinsey surveyed a random group of 7th graders as to whether they preferred video games, sports, or neither. So use the survey results to make predictions for the entire grade, 7th grade class with 360 students. So I know that 360 students is gonna be something key. I know that's what we're talking about. And then they're asking about these sports or these activities, one of them being the video game, because preferred video games is the one that they're asking us to test. So let's go ahead and set up a WGU. And what will happen is that we will encounter something. We will encounter missing information that we have to go ahead and make up for. So what we're talking about, I know that we're talking about video games. So I'm gonna put down VG for video games. I'm gonna put down ST to represent students, because we're talking about the total number of students compared to the video games that they play, or the ones that preferred playing video games. How does that work out? Well, I know that it says 15 students prefer video games, but of how many? They never told us in the problem how many total students that she surveyed. So how do we figure that out? Well, we just have to do it the hard way. We have to add up all the students. So she spoke to 15 who said video games, 22 that said sports, and 3 that said neither. So in total, she spoke to 40 students. So 40 students will go down here. 15 out of 40 students said that they preferred video games as their activity. So how many video game students will we find if we spoke to all 360 of the students in the school? Now I can go ahead and set up my cross multiplication. 40 times x will be 40x. And then 15 times 360, that's actually 5,400. It's a very large number. So now I'm going to divide both sides by 40. And then I'm going to go ahead and take off this 0 and that 0 to make my division a little bit easier. And I'll go ahead and set up my division right here. So I'm going to go ahead and put down in this space, I got 540 and then divided by just 4. See, taking those zeros off makes it a little bit easier. So 4 times 1 will get me 4, difference of 1, bring down the 4. 4 times 3 will give me 12. That's really close to 14 without going over. I have a difference of 2. I'm going to bring down this last 0. And then 4 times 5 gives me that last 20 that I need. And so I have 135, and that's 135 students who prefer to play video games as their activity. Okay, so using this exact same scenario, try and figure out what's going to happen here, because it's going to say, based on the information in the table, so still using this table, what is the most reasonable prediction of the number of votes for video games in the next 80 votes? So this time it's not 360, it's just 80. So go ahead and set up your WGU, pause the video, get your answer, and see if you got it correct. Okay, hope that was a good enough pause. Let's go ahead and take a look. I got WGU. The two things that we're comparing are still the table that it's showing video games and showing students. And it's going to still say that 15 out of 40 students prefer video games. So how many video game students or video game preferers will we get out of 80? So we're still setting up cross multiplying and dividing. Cross multiply, 40 times x is going to be 40x again. 15 times 80 will give us 1,200, dividing both sides by 40. Again, I can take off that 0 and that 0, and then I can write down what my answer is going to be. I'm going to do my division here. So 120 divided by 4. 4 times 3 gives me that 12. 0 left over, bring down this other 0. 4 times 0 gets me 0. So 30 will be my answer for 30 total students. All right. So hopefully this gives you a good idea on how to make predictions based on given information using sampling and populations. But as always, if you need more help, you can come see me in tutoring.